After months of ignoring the issue, Donald Trump is finally turning his focus to the out of control affordability issue. Despite calling said crisis a, quote, con job made up by Democrats. Tomorrow, he will travel to Pennsylvania to tout his so-called economic agenda. But judging by a roundtable the president held today at the White House, it seems that his strategy will be to tell the voters to ignore their lived realities. Just blame Joe Biden.
We inherited a mess, affordability, but you can call it affordability or anything you want, but the Democrats caused the affordability problem, and we're the ones that are fixing it. So it's a very simple statement. They caused it, we're fixing it. Unfortunately, under sleepy Joe Biden, he was a sleepy guy. Our farmers were crushed by the worst inflation in modern history.
Joining us now is Democratic Governor Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania. Welcome, Governor.
Governor, given that the president just learned the word affordability, how do you suspect he's going to address the affordability crisis?
I mean, if he comes to Pennsylvania and spews more BS like he did today at the White House, I think what you're ultimately going to find are people tuning him out, because folks can't unsee what they see when they go to the grocery store, which is that beef and OJ and bread and the normal staples that they need in their homes, those prices have dramatically increased on Donald Trump's watch. And so what you have is a president who seems to want to blame everybody else, whose economic policies are failing. As a result of his tariffs, things cost more whether you're at the grocery store or you are farmers. He's putting people out of business as a result of his economic policies. And I think folks are smarter and too smart to believe his rhetoric.
You know, they're from October 28th, this is about Lee Valley business in Pennsylvania confirmed as the lone Northeast state with growing economy. This is a quote from here. New data from the Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development reveals that more than $31.6 billion has been secured in private sector investments and over 16,700 jobs created since the start of the Shapiro administration. Yeah. So, Governor, what will your response be, let's just say, if and frankly when Donald Trump inevitably tries to take credit for this success and this growth tomorrow?
Well, first of all, I'm grateful that you referenced that Pennsylvania has the only growing economy in the northeastern part of the United States. We've secured tens of billions of dollars in investment. We're producing more energy than ever before. Our unemployment rate is as low as it's ever been, and I'm really, really proud of that fact. In fact, I will tell you, we have cut taxes 7 different times during my 3 years as governor, including a new earned income tax credit at the state level that's going to help 940,000 Pennsylvanians who are working put more money back in their pockets. We've cut taxes to afford childcare. We've cut taxes for our small businesses, for our seniors. Here's the problem. Every time we cut taxes and put money back in people's pockets or create more jobs or economic opportunity, we run into the federal government's economic policies, Trump's economic policies, which make it harder. I hear it from our manufacturers. I hear it from our farmers who are doing everything right and who are getting screwed because of Donald Trump's economic policy. So he can show up in Pennsylvania tomorrow night and he can put a bunch of rhetoric out there. But at the end of the day, people are a whole lot smarter than that. They understand that he's misleading them, and they understand that Donald Trump is making their lives tougher, while here in Pennsylvania, we're investing in people, we're putting money back in their pockets, and we're making things a little bit better for them.
Governor, I appreciate the prebuttal to the president's visit because, as you know, there's been a lot of noise coming out of this White House signifying very much of nothing. We were talking about earlier in the last hour about the attempt by this administration to go after someone like Letitia James over a box she checked on her mortgage, using that as a way to sort of frame up a fraudulent claim of abuse and so forth, using the mortgage application for that purpose. But this is an administration, in my view at this point, that has created a space in which people can't even afford to get the paperwork to fill out for a mortgage because they can't afford a mortgage. They can't afford the rent for the apartment that they're looking for. They're having to downsize their lives and to make very tough choices at kitchen tables, very much like the ones you're very familiar with across the state of Pennsylvania, because of the trade policies, the economic policy, the fiscal policy of this administration. A lot of governors like yourself are having to take this burden on. You've noted exactly what you've done and are doing in the state of Pennsylvania. Speak a little bit more about the significant role of governors at a time like this, under leadership like yours that tries to buffet and withstand the downward pressures on the economies of states like Pennsylvania by an administration that fundamentally doesn't know how the economy works.
Yeah. Look, I think fundamentally you have to understand when we're running our states, when any governor is running their state, you want the federal government to be a partner with you. You want them to be a value add, whether it's an extra dollar for an initiative or cutting through the red tape to help you get stuff done. What we find with this White House is every day they're making our lives more difficult, demanding people's private, personal information, trying to take billions of dollars away from taxpayers in our state. So every day I'm trying to advance the cause for my fellow Pennsylvanians as other governors do in their states. And then with the other hand, we're trying to fight off the federal government who are making our lives much more difficult. You mentioned housing affordability, which the federal government has failed in. We've got a housing initiative at the state level we hope can help overcome that. Here's another one for you, Michael, healthcare. I mean, I just want you to understand, in my state, as a result, a direct result of the president's actions, we are about to lose 150,000 people off of our Affordable Care Act, which is known as Penny, if they don't extend the subsidies. 310,000 Pennsylvanians are about to lose Medicaid coverage, and 140,000 are about to lose SNAP, the Food Assistance Initiative. And why? Because Donald Trump decided it was better to take money and help away from those folks who are working, who are struggling to get by, and instead give a massive tax cut to people who don't need it, quite frankly. And at the same time, as a result of him pushing the tariff button, he's jacked up costs on everybody at the same time. So if you're struggling to get by in Pennsylvania, yeah, you're getting a tax cut from me and you're getting investments that are helping you. But by the same token, you're about to lose your health care because of Donald Trump. Every time you go to the grocery store, things cost more because of Donald Trump. Big employers in your region like Mack Truck in the Lehigh Valley, just, maybe an hour or so from where the president will be tomorrow, laid off hundreds of Pennsylvanians because of the tariff policy. Heck, if you're just trying to buy Christmas gifts for your family this year, you're paying more for those gifts because of Trump's tariff policy. So every single way, on big things like housing and healthcare, and on the daily things like groceries and gifts, Donald Trump is making your life cost a whole lot more.
Governor, you might have noticed the president's not out on the stump, not out on the road as much as he once was. What does it say to you that one of his only trips this year is to Pennsylvania?
I mean, look, we're the ultimate swing state. I get that. And he wants to come here and make his case. I think what's going to be more interesting to see, as opposed to where he chose to go, is can this guy actually articulate a plan that's going to reduce costs for the American people? By the way, could he stay on message for what will probably be some hour-long rambling at his rally? I think, there's an important point here that the American people are seeing prices go up. They're feeling it. They know that money's being taken out of their bank accounts for more money's being taken out for the same amount of stuff maybe they got before. They know they're worried that they're about to lose their health care. And to Michael's question before, they're also maybe either trapped in a housing situation that's not ideal for them, or they can't get housing. They understand that. And so no matter how much bluster or rhetoric the president shows up in northeastern Pennsylvania with tomorrow night, it's not going to change where the American people are right now, and that is frustrated with rising costs and really concerned about their futures. I wish the president would actually have policies that are going to make people's lives better. And if he had those and he wanted to articulate those here in Pennsylvania, that'd be great. But that's not what he's about to do. It's going to be more grievance politics, attacking more people instead of actually solving people's problems. Here in Pennsylvania, we solve problems. We get stuff done. We make people's lives better. And by the way, other governors across the country, too, do that. Other executives do that. We should expect the same from the President of the United States.
As Donald Trump is trying to use and sometimes abuse power and to enrich or promote himself. The Kennedy Center honors were last night. He made an unusual choice to host, although a president could do that, but then went farther and said he wants to shape culture in ways that the government is directly restricted from doing. As you've probably followed, we've mentioned on our air, there's a big deal to do a merger with Netflix. There's other companies launching a hostile bid to get involved. We'll get into all that, but bottom line, big picture, those things are reviewed only in a nonpartisan way by the government for the benefit of the public interest, for consumers, to make sure there's not a monopoly or that you were charged double for Netflix. They don't usually involve politicians or the president directly interfering for their own interests. That's the context for Donald Trump discussing the potential merger of what are two of the largest media companies in our country and also with global reach, Netflix and Warner Brothers.
That's got to go through a process, and we'll see what happens. Netflix is a great company, and they have a very big market share. And when they have Warner Brothers, that share goes up a lot. So I don't know. That's going to be for some economists to tell, and I'll be involved in that decision too. But it is a big market share. There's no question about it. It could be a problem.
Fact check, true. It is a big market share, and that is a legitimate thing for the government to test. That's why we have a whole antitrust division of the DOJ. But legal check, false. It's not for Donald Trump to be personally involved. Indeed, we have the independence there at the DOJ, just like you have it in other economic areas or interest rates, because for many, many years, it has been settled precedent and better practice for us, the public, to not have politicians putting their thumb on the scale. If you go back far enough, this was an issue in the first Trump term when he was seen as and widely criticized for interfering in a Warner merger involving AT&T. So some of the same players, but different now, different companies involved. And then they were denying it. Then, in first-term version of Trump, most people around him said he's not doing this because he's concerned or against CNN or personal reasons. They denied it. Now, Trump all but admits it, saying he'll be personally involved, and there's more. His son-in-law, Jared Kushner, is now part of the hostile bid by Paramount. That's what I mentioned. They're basically the different company backed by the Ellisons, who are very close to Trump. They want to buy Warner instead of Netflix. So this is a huge conflict of interest to have the president say he wants to be personally involved, while yet again his family pops up taking sides and presumably being in line to make a lot of money if they win. There's also this Trump supporter pictured here in the Oval Office. Now, the Ellisons can have a relationship with Trump or any other politician. And as long as the government is not cheating or corrupting power at the federal level to help them, the Ellisons, like everyone else in our big capitalist free speech economy, have every right to publish and broadcast anything they want. Please don't mishear me to be suggesting that there are some good billionaires and then bad billionaires and all that kind of talk. We have a free market, and we publish a lot of material through the airwaves, through print, through companies. The New York Times is a newspaper. It's a journalistic outlet. It's also a publicly traded company. That's fine. But it's not fine and could even be an abuse of power if the government, whoever the politician, in this case Trump, are putting their thumb on the scale, trying to approve, pick winners and losers, or punish their political First Amendment protected opponents and critics through this process. And as Trump said, we're talking about major market share. We're talking about some of the largest companies with the most media in the country. Now, as for the Kennedy Center, Trump also used that backdrop to talk about how he views himself as less of a public servant of the people with a temporary time in office and then return to being a citizen, and more like a kind of autocratic, self-dealing monarch. Like he would really maybe joke about or actually name institutions after himself. Well, let's take a moment to remind everyone about that board that he, in the structure of that answer, says, well, it's up to them, and as if they might be some independent random group. But in a spirit of purging that we've seen, not a crime, but a type of purging that breaks all kinds of nonpartisan traditions in our government, he made a point of ousting the board to have his loyalists to try to reshape what the Kennedy Center is. And historically, it has been more of a balanced, kind of bipartisan thing. You can debate their choices. You can debate anybody who's honored there, musically or otherwise, but there was a balance to it. Now he's installed loyalists. As for the naming of these institutions, it's not just a red carpet comment. There's something called the Institute of Peace, which is one of those kind of government-related institutions you might not think about all that often. He's already renamed it after himself. He's hung these banners that we see around Washington, something that would be a kind of mini scandal, or at least a joke if most presidents did it. But this is maybe the least of the worries of Trump critics. And as we look at the guardrails being tested right now, today the Trump administration is before the Supreme Court, grasping for more power on a substantive matter, right? You have to look at all of this together. One joke on the red carpet, even one renaming you might put aside, but he wants to take the power to fire other independent government officials. He wants to reshape so many parts of the federal government as a personal or parochial activity, not a place for nonpartisan public sector expertise. So he would do to the media oversight I mentioned the same thing he would do to the cultural oversight, the same thing he would do to the Fed if he can get away with it. And the Times reports, it seems like the Trump-appointed justices and conservatives on the court are friendly to that argument. It's a dynamic that alarmed Justice Sotomayor, and she argues and warns that kind of approach could go further than monarchy.
Neither the king, nor parliament, nor prime ministers, England at the time of the founding, ever had a unqualified removal power.
Removal power is the legal term about who can fire and withdraw the employees of the federal government. It is well established that the president gets their cabinet and gets to pick policy. That's not really in doubt. What we're talking about now is Donald Trump demanding these type of powers, consistent with what I just told you about in those other realms, well beyond what any president has demanded. And think about it. If you have a government that can go up and down the entire org chart and put in loyalists regardless of their qualifications or their independence or even their legal scruples, you take an oath to uphold the Constitution and only put in all of your people, what do you end up with? Justice Sotomayor warns that, which is not currently possible, leads you down a road to something that looks like a corrupt patronage machine that would make even the kings blush. And here we are in this no kings era, while the would-be king sees his approval sag to historic lows. What he wants is everything. And what he has in terms of actual support in the country is ebbing towards some of the lowest periods we've seen. I want to bring in our professor, Jason Johnson from Morgan State, MS analyst, and Molly Jong-Fast, contributing opinion writer for the New York Times and also an analyst with us. Jason, these are separate points I'm pulling on, and I would forgive any politician a little banter on the red carpet. Oh, maybe I will, maybe I won't, if that's where it stopped. But in fact, it's not a joke, and the Supreme Court's looking at even more substantial power. What do you think is alarming here if we're going to be a society that still has free speech and a government that knows its place?
The idea that Donald Trump is trying to put his name, his stamp, his power, his face on everything, right? Regardless of if he has any expertise. It reminds me of the very popular documentary on Netflix right now about Sean Combs. And there's a key scene where Suge Knight stands on stage and says, if you're tired of that guy trying to be all up in the videos, all up on stage, maybe you should go somewhere else. That's what we're looking at. Donald Trump is trying to be all up in everything. And he shouldn't be involved in murder. He shouldn't be putting his name on the Kennedy Center. And that not only chokes competition and makes life more difficult for us as American citizens, but it's also damaging to democracy. And that's what I see the larger issue is.
So I have a question. I'm going to let you finish, but I have a question. Are you the first person in the history of the world to compare President Trump to the accusations against Diddy at the Source Awards by Suge Knight?
It is quite possible. I might have been one of the first people to make that connection, but given the criminal history of Diddy and the accusations of impropriety, there's a lot of parallels between him and the current occupant of the White House.
You know, Jason brings the fire, Molly. Your thoughts here and why some of what's happening, I don't want to say behind the scenes, court is public, but out of the view of some of these controversies is as important.
So I would say this: Donald Trump loves culture, and he loves it for a number of reasons. But I think the biggest reason is that he has sort of practiced this politics is downstream of culture, this Breitbartian thesis that if you get in the culture, you can get in and win. And that has worked for him 2 different times, right? We saw him in the 2024 cycle on the podcast, at sporting events. He wasn't doing that because he loves sporting. He was doing that to get in front of low frequency voters. So he does see, and he knows that he got famous on The Apprentice. So his idea, the Kennedy Center is a sort of natural extension of his. And again, culture, I'm using the word culture very loosely. I'm not saying he wants to read War and Peace. I'm saying he wants to be in this other part of the media complex that's not politics. And so I think that's what we're seeing here. And he also does see an expansion here in the Kennedy Center situation. He gets to put his people in there. It's like a patronage thing a little bit, too.
There are more bipartisan calls for the removal of Pete Hegseth as Secretary of Defense. Here is Republican Congressman Don Bacon saying he's seen all he needs to see.
After Signalgate, I think I've seen enough. What I really wanted to see was someone take responsibility, own up to a mistake, and then when he blamed the media or the journalist for the story, it ruined his credibility. And he had some issues going into the hearings, but once he got confirmed, I said, well, let's give him a fair chance. But what I've seen is what I call just a poor decision making.
There are more calls for the Pentagon to release the full footage from the September 2nd boat strikes in the Caribbean, including the highly controversial second strike, which killed 2 shipwrecked sailors who survived the first strike. Just a handful of congressional lawmakers have seen the footage of that second boat strike. Pete Hegseth was asked about whether or not he's willing to make the video public over the weekend. Here was his response to the question.
President Trump said he would have no problem if the full video of the strike is released. When can we see that video? When will you release it?
We're reviewing it right now to make sure sources, methods. I mean, it's an ongoing operation, TTPs. We've got operators out there doing this right now. So whatever we were to decide to release, we'd have to be very responsible about.
You heard the reporter say that Trump would have no problem releasing the video of the second strike. That's because that's what Trump said out loud. And just to remind all of you, here's Trump saying just that.
You released video of that first boat strike on September 2nd, but not the second video. Will you release video of that strike so that the American people can see for themselves what happened?
I don't know what they have, but whatever they have, we'd certainly release. No problem.
It was last week. Whatever they have, we'd certainly release it, no problem. That's a quote. Well, in the last hour, Donald Trump, the guy who just said that, we played it for you, quote, that would be no problem, releasing the video of the second strike, was confronted with what he said not 1 week ago. And here's how he reacted when pressed on his commitment to his own words to release the video.
Mr. President, you said you would have no problem with releasing the full video of that strike on September 2nd off the coast of Venezuela. Secretary Hegseth now says...
You said that. I didn't say that. This is ABC fake news.
You said that you would have no problem releasing the full bit. Okay, well, Secretary Hegseth...
No, whatever Hegseth wants to do is okay with me.
He now says it's under review. Are you ordering the secretary to release that full video?
Whatever he decides is okay with me. So every boat we knock out of the water, every boat, we save 25,000 American lives. That was a boat loaded up with drugs. I saw the video.
Admitting to releasing the full video?
Didn't I just tell you that?
You said that it was up to Secretary Hegseth.
You're the most obnoxious reporter in the whole place. Let me just tell you, you are an obnoxious, actually a terrible reporter. And it's always the same thing with you. I told you, whatever Pete Hegseth wants to do is okay with me.
So I want to bring into our coverage former Captain Margaret Donovan. She was a captain in the Army, serving in the 101st Airborne Division and later in 5th Special Forces Group. She was also captain of the JAG Corps and is a former assistant U.S. attorney for the District of Connecticut. She's now a visiting lecturer at Yale Law. Claire is still with us. I don't want to zoom past what just happened because I don't ever want it to be normal. I have a daughter, I have a son, and it should never be normal that the leader of the free world, well, two things should never be normal. Let's hit pause. One, Donald Trump is the commander-in-chief, and he doesn't remember what he said about releasing the video, the second strike, 4 days ago. So if I said something on TV today that was the opposite or didn't remember what I said on Thursday, I know the names of the right-wing bloggers who would be asking the question, does she forget or did she misspeak? And it's a fair question. Did he forget or did he misspeak? What do you think?
I could not pretend to know what is going on in the president's mind. But I will say this, we need transparency. When you have a Secretary of Defense who is backing into a corner and pointing at the other guy when there is a scandal like this, when there is a very serious situation that requires stability and sobriety and calm-headed thinking in an emergency like what the nation is going through right now with this boat strike, you cannot have a lack of leadership like Secretary Hegseth and his chain of command above him have displayed. So I think that the only way that the public is going to have answers and to be able to understand this is if we have a release of the strike. And it pains me to say that, and I know that you knew this, but I used to work airstrikes in Iraq and Syria. Those are not enjoyable videos, but you cannot use these videos for content on your social media feed for months and now suddenly say that there are some guardrails that you have to adhere to before you can release it. I think you just have to bear responsibility for your decisions, and we're not seeing that here. And to your point, you know, the Secretary of Defense, this might be one of the most important cabinet decisions. In my personal opinion, it is the most important cabinet position. And we cannot have our sons and daughters serving in uniform right now to somebody who does not take responsibility, who goes back on his word, who you know, is unclear about directions, whether it's the president or the secretary, and who isn't going to be transparent with something as serious as this.
Claire, the second thing I wanted to hit pause on with both of you is, and never normalize, is the verbal violence, the verbal assault on another female journalist. He called ABC's Rachel Scott today, quote, obnoxious and terrible. December 6th, he called Caitlin Collins, quote, stupid and nasty. On November 27th, he said, are you stupid? To CBS journalist Nancy Cortez. On November 26th, he called the New York Times' Katie Rogers, quote, ugly. On November 18th, he called ABC's Mary Bruce terrible and insubordinate, to whom I'm not sure. November 14th, he told a Bloomberg reporter, quote, quiet piggy. This is sick shit. This is sick. And anyone in the room is in the room to do a job for their viewers or their readers. But they should go home tonight and think about whether their sisters or their daughters or their moms or their sons or their husbands or their fathers think that there's something else they should do the next time he calls a female journalist obnoxious, terrible, stupid, nasty, stupid, ugly, terrible, insubordinate, or piggy. Because maybe if Donald Trump can't live without being on TV, and maybe if they said, you know what, we're going to have some solidarity like they did with him wanting to change the names of oceans. I mean, we're either going to normalize this, and then you're going to hear all sorts of prominent people calling women all sorts of names. I'm sure by the time I get off TV, I'll have a few of those myself. But we're either going to normalize this and usher in an era of unprecedented misogyny, or that press corps is going to act as one and say no more.
Yeah, and, you know, he does it when he gets caught in a lie. And I think the captain was being, as I would expect, measured and calm and strong in the way she answered your question. Did he just forget or did he misspeak? No, he lied. And he lies so often. That is what has become normal. He thinks he can get away with lying if he attacks the person who's pointing out that he's lying. And, you know, Eric Schmidt, the senator from Missouri, you showed in a clip earlier in the program, where when he was confronted with a difficult question, he attacked George Stephanopoulos. You saw Marjorie Taylor Greene do the same thing on 60 Minutes when she was asked a tough question. They are teaching young people that if you get a question you don't like that will hold you accountable, you either lie or you attack the person asking the question. That's what they're normalizing. And it's very, very sad for people who are supposed to be mentors and role models in terms of how you serve the public. And I got to tell you, the idea that they used all this footage as a social media video game for the guy who says we're trying to make him into a cartoon. Well, he is kind of a cartoon. He's an insecure man, and he thinks he needs social media to prop him up. He's using all that video for them to now say they can't show the second strike because of sources and methods? Are you kidding me? What? You showed all the video. You've showed it all. Anybody who's running a boat through their nose. So this notion that they're using this excuse on the second video, you know why they're not showing that second video? They're showing the second video because they don't want you to see it, because it is ugly.
Yeah, they're not showing the second video because it shows what Congressman Jim Himes and others have said it shows.
Exactly.
Joining us, MS Now senior legal reporter Lisa Rubin, Milton R. Underwood Chair in Free Enterprise at the Vanderbilt University Law School, and former clerk for Justice Antonin Scalia, Brian Fitzpatrick, and Slate senior writer and co-host of the Amicus podcast, Mark Joseph Stern. Mark, lay out this case plainly for us.
So in March, Donald Trump fired Rebecca Slaughter, a Democratic commissioner on the FTC, which regulates antitrust and competition in the American economy. He was not allowed to do that. Congress expressly prohibited the president from firing members of the FTC without good cause, and everyone agrees there was no good cause here. And 90 years ago, in a case called Humphrey's Executor, the Supreme Court upheld this exact restriction on the president's power to fire FTC commissioners. The Supreme Court unanimously held that Congress had constitutional authority to limit the president's control over these agencies by firing their members. And yet, in May, the Supreme Court, over the shadow docket, allowed Trump to fire Slaughter anyway. It has allowed him to fire a number of other ostensibly independent agency heads. And so today's oral arguments were all about whether or not Trump will be able to claim this power moving forward to essentially purge these independent agencies of Democrats he dislikes and ensure that he has total control over them, because he can install all of his own loyalists to do his bidding, and he doesn't have to defer to any kind of independence or nonpartisanship that Congress wanted these agencies to exercise when it created them.
So, Brian, this is what is considered an independent agency. Why would the Supreme Court want to hand authority to fire somebody from an independent agency to the executive?
Well, they might have to, because that's what the Constitution requires. These agencies were created during the Progressive Era, 100 years after the Constitution was written. And the argument is that the original plan, the separation of powers, did not allow Congress to give responsibility to the president and then try to control what the president does with that responsibility. That if you're going to hand over power to the president, then you got to hand over power to the president. That's the separation of powers. You can't interfere once you've decided to hand over a certain amount of legislative power.
But isn't this Congress's power?
Well, it's interesting, Katie. I mean, listening to both Brian and Mark talk, you can see how it could be both powers, right? It certainly is Congress's prerogative to set up the agencies. No agency can be created but for an act of Congress. Certainly Congress's power to appropriate money for the agencies. Congress, in writing these statutes, essentially said that presidents could appoint members to these bodies in sort of staggered terms to ensure that no one party ever had complete control over these agencies, and to ensure some sort of stability in what they were regulating. Things like trade or the environment or our election systems. The question is there a place in our constitutional structure for a truly independent agency? Folks like Brian would say no. Folks like Mark would say yes. And that is the crux of what happened at the court today.
I guess we raised this earlier, and I think it's worth going back to. If you're going to say that there are no real independent agencies, why draw a line at the Federal Reserve? Why make that an independent agency?
Well, I think that's a very good question. And there wasn't a very good answer given today in the argument about how you draw that line. I think the Supreme Court's going to try to kick that can down the road, at least for another month or so. And I think it's a very good question. You know, in their prior shadow docket ruling, they said it's a quasi-private agency, and so therefore it's different. But I don't really buy it. And
So then, I mean, Mark, weigh in on that, because it does seem like in this case you have a SCOTUS that says, we believe in, we're textualism, we're originalists, we believe there's no real independence and Congress can't hand over their authority, as Lisa has been saying, and that the executive has this broad authority to run the executive branch. But at the same time saying, in this one special scenario, we're not going to be originalists and we're not going to be textualists. Why is that?
Well, I agree with Brian that the carve out for the Federal Reserve is unpersuasive, but to me, that just shows the incoherence behind this entire enterprise. Brian says the Constitution requires allowing the president to fire the leaders of agencies, but that does not appear in the text of the Constitution. Nowhere did the framers write that the president could fire any agency head that he wanted. The framers did write that Congress would have the authority, as Lisa noted, to create departments and agencies. Congress could abolish an agency anytime it wanted. So the idea that Congress could just eliminate an agency but can't place modest restrictions around when the president can fire its leader just strikes me as highly questionable. And I think that what the Supreme Court is trying to do is give Trump power over agencies that it doesn't care that much about, or that they think the president should really be in charge of, like the FTC, but then to carve out the Federal Reserve because, well, there's a lot of data that shows that having an independent central bank is super important for modern economies, that giving the president control over the central bank and monetary policy almost always leads to depressions or recessions. And so it seems as if these justices will follow this theory to a certain point where they're still comfortable with it, but then when it leads them off a cliff that they don't like, where the practical consequences are just unthinkable, they'll draw the line. And they really have not given a good reason why. And so again, to me, that suggests that maybe they should rethink this project and defer to what the people's representatives in Congress decided to do when structuring the government, which was carve out some independence for agencies so that they weren't just bending to political pressure from the White House all the time.
So that there was a mark of stability that carried on through administrations. But Brian, you said a moment ago you're not so sure that that reasoning is a good one, and I guess Mark also agrees with you on that. Do you think that the president should be allowed to fire anybody on the Federal Reserve?
I mean, I don't know, because I haven't looked at the question as carefully as the justices will, but I don't want to jump to conclusions about what they're going to do. Mm-hmm. They haven't decided that case yet.
That's true, they have not.
And we got to give them a chance, and maybe they'll end up surprising us with what they say.
I guess my bigger question here is, it seems like this current SCOTUS, it doesn't seem like it's true, they don't have any fealty toward precedent. I mean, they're overturning long-standing precedent left and right. If they overturn this is a 90-year precedent. Humphrey's executor. Why does this Supreme Court feel so comfortable saying all these other courts were wrong in their reading of the Constitution?
I think it's a very fair question, and I think you're right. It looks that they have less regard for what went on before, and I think the reason for that is this is the first time when you have a majority of the court that's really coalesced around a judicial philosophy, originalism, textualism, you noted that. And when you have a philosophy, all these decisions that came before that did not adhere to that philosophy, you don't treat them with the same regard that you might if you didn't have a philosophy and just every opinion comes to you and you feel like you have to follow it. Now they've got a theory. These prior courts did not follow that theory, and so they're not giving them the same respect.
I mean, what else could be on the docket, in your opinion, if they're gonna look at past decisions and say they don't follow my textualist or originalist philosophy? What else could get overturned?
I mean, I think a lot of things could. And, one of the questions that came up today in the argument was about the civil service. If the president has to have control over the executive branch, what about all the low-level employees? Can he fire all of those people, too? And, again, the Solicitor General didn't really have a good answer to that question. He said, we're not challenging that today, but the justices kept asking, what about tomorrow?
I mean, this is It is handing over the executive a lot more authority than the executive has enjoyed in modern times. As the government has expanded, the executive has been reined in to a degree, and this is a real change.
It is a real change, and there's something else going on here, too, if we can just pull back the curtain, which is, I think, when we talk about the operative philosophy of this court, one thing that I think also bounds the majority together is a sort of antipathy toward the modern administrative or regulatory state. This is not a group of people that thinks that our country is better off for sort of the enlargement of executive agencies making rules and legislating through regulation. And so you've got a bunch of people on this court, including most notably Justice Gorsuch, Justice Kavanaugh, who are big adherents of what's called the non-delegation principle. So it's not just that they're enlarging the power of the executive through the unitary executive theory. They're also sort of saying to Congress, hey, the power that you do have, it's not yours to give away. Either make the rules yourself or don't tell agencies that they can sort of have all the power that is supposed to be your own.
Don't give independence. You don't have the right to hand out independence.
It's not just that you don't have the right to give independence in terms of independence from presidential interference, but you don't have the right to hand over to agencies things that Congress should reserve for itself. You can't say to an agency, you know what, we're feeling a little bit too lazy to set out the rules for X or Y or Z. You agency should do this through rulemaking. The belief on some of the justices' behalf is it should be more transparent. It should be more politically accountable. Congress has certain powers, and they should be jealous of its own constitutional prerogatives. That's something that a number of people on this court believe in very strongly. And as you and I were discussing last hour, when you layer the unitary executive theory on top of this obsession with non-delegation, you end up in a place where Congress, is going to have a lot less power to delegate away to executive agencies or even independent agencies.
The consequences of handing more power to the executive can be pretty broad. But if we're going to just look narrowly on regulations, like overturning clean air, clean water regulations, these sorts of things were put into place because for a long time they were abused. They were abused by corporations in search of profit. They weren't worried about what was getting in the water and going downstream and perhaps poisoning towns and neighborhoods and children and whatnot. And so ultimately the federal government had to step in and regulate in order to protect the citizens, which is the baseline job of a government, to protect the citizens. We're so far away from the founding. Is it still a smart idea for all of us individuals to base our judicial theory or legal theory based on a bunch of guys 250 years ago guessing at what might be a good system of government?
I think it is, and I think this president proves it better than anyone else ever could. The entire theory of the separation of powers was if you break up power, both between the various branches and between the federal and the state governments, then our liberties are protected. And what we have done over the last 250 years is ignore that lesson and give more and more power to the federal government and then more and more power to the executive branch of the federal government. And now we have one person with way too much power over all of our lives. And I actually hope that what we learn from this is Congress, as Lisa notes, could set these rules itself for clean air and clean water. And hey, what about 50 state governments? They can do some of this stuff too. We don't have to put all of our eggs in one
air
basket.
does not stay in one state and just respect the boundaries of that one state. It flows all over.